Hello and welcome to Comic Book Movie Oblivion, the podcast about feature films based on comic books and comic strips that people have stopped talking about. We are your hosts, Jordan and Kumar, that's me.
And me.
And this week we are talking about A Distant Neighborhood. The title of the movie is, I can't pronounce.
Quartier Lointain.
Okay, well done. Pause the podcast. I'd say there's some spoilers in this one.
Yeah.
But hard to find this movie. Have to probably special order this comic.
Despite a distinguished and famous translator.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I don't know what to say. Actually, in a way, we are going to spoil some stuff, but...
We're going to spoil it, but no, stick around.
Yeah.
And if you like what you hear, it'll be a while till we
yeah, because in a sense, the revelation of why did he do it is kind of...
It's not that much of a... You already know by that point, because it's been quite heavily telegraphed.
Yeah, or... It's not like a... It's not a bombshell revelation. No. It's just like...
This isn't a mystery.
This dude's a middle-aged man.
Yeah.
That's the revelation.
Yeah. Yes, he's having a midlife crisis.
By the way,
There you go.
I'm turning 50 tomorrow, and that's the reason I kind of had this one on my radar to do around this point in time.
Oh, good. So we're going to get the inside scoop.
Yeah, but, now...
myself, I'm a middle-aged man.
Yeah, but I was kind of like, now I'm kind of like, geez, should I really have done this? And,
I can't wait.
We'll talk about it in the movie, but in the movie's like, hanging out with he sees his sister.
Yeah.
And he's like, come up and kiss me.
Yeah, it's really nice.
My brother just passed away last month, and I was like, oh man, if I could go back and hang out with him when I was, 10 and he was 8.
Well, that's it. That's the dream, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because that's what this comic and this film is about. That the trope of going back in time to when you were a younger person and having a chance to be young and to
appreciate
do things different.
Appreciate the things.
Or appreciate, the
people.
It's a common... It's as a trope, it's nameless on TV tropes, I discovered.
Right.
The closest they come is the Groundhog Day.
Okay.
Which is not exactly the same.
Right.
But this theme, this kind of conceit, has produced some outstanding kind of fiction.
Yeah.
Ken Grinwood's novel Replay. That's an amazing book.
Okay.
Possibly the best episode of television ever filmed, Tapestry from The Next Generation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Although Q is in it, it's still excellent.
It's okay.
It's rich material, a lot of pathos in this kind of notion, and this film and comic is no exception. Yeah,
and another thing is I'm super jet lagged because I just got back from Canada yesterday. We've been in this position before.
Indeed we have.
Where I've been, like, next day, let's record, I'm hopped up on coffee.
Yep. That's it.
Am I in the right state of mind to be doing this? All right, we're going to try it anyway. Okay, so A Distant Neighborhood by Jiro Taniguchi, who passed away, I'm going to say, about 4 or 5 years ago. Now, this initially came out in 1998. French edition came out in 2002. That's significant because there's a French cartoonist named Frédéric Boilet, and he worked on flipping the comic to a left-to-right reading order with Taniguchi. So they sat down, flipped the panels around, or kept them, or rearranged stuff so that it would read.
Yes.
It would flow.
I was curious about that because the copy that you gave me, I noticed, says adapted by Boilet.
Frédéric Boilet, yeah.
And I thought, that's interesting. You don't usually see that on the
very rare these days. I think at this stage, I can't think of a single manga that's coming out flipped.
Oh, of course, right.
Yeah.
So this is 20 years ago.
Yeah, so 22 years ago, actually even the English manga was all getting flipped at the time. So stuff that I worked on when I first started out was getting flipped, and that.
But no longer. So it's like the dubbing. It's being seen as
it's inauthentic to flip it.
Precisely.
But this was done at the time you'd do it, but it was very rare that the original artist would be involved, but he was involved in this case, or at least approving what
gives it a certain authenticity.
Yes, and Boileau was a important French cartoonist in his own right. So, right. English edition came out initially in 2016 from Fanfare. Fanfare Ponent Mon is the name of this company. It is basically a two-man operation.
Cool.
It was, I think, Stephen Robson is the editor. I don't know if I ever found out what the name of his business partner was, and I think the other guy was just doing the business side. Don't quote me on that. And even he passed away a couple of years ago, I think. I hope I'm not getting that wrong. So I was a translator on this. Mm-hmm. I've translated all the Taniguchi work. So only one company in the world is licensing Taniguchi in English, and that's Fanfare, this two-man operation. Now one-man operation. And I think, so I started translating his stuff maybe 10 years ago, so that I'm like the only quote-unquote official Taniguchi translator.
Wow, I feel honored.
We will have one more of his works will be on the show.
Oh, really?
Yeah, one other. So, as we've kind of alluded to, this is it's your Rip Van Winkle or Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur Court type time travel story.
It's a subtrope of that, isn't it? Because you go back to your own youth.
Yes. It's actually almost identical to Peggy Sue Got Married.
Yes, it is, rather.
Which is where she just goes to the reunion and she faints and she wakes up and she's in the past.
Yes.
And here this guy faints and he wakes up and he's in the past. There's no real explanation at all. Except that he's a businessman. He's a businessman in Tokyo.
Yep.
He's traveled to Kyoto for some sort of deal. So he's away from his family for a few days. He's got a wife and two girls at home. Mm-hmm. Teen daughters. One is a little bit older, about ready to move out. But he's gone on this business trip and he's really hungover. And he gets on a train to go back to Tokyo, and he has gotten onto the wrong train somehow.
Yep.
And he wakes up, and he has actually landed in his own hometown.
Yes.
Which he hasn't been to since his mother's funeral. That was the last time he visited there.
In the film, it's 20 years ago. Here, I think it might be a little less, but it's a long time.
If it's 20 years, that means the movie's set in 95, which doesn't quite gel with certain other things.
His mother lived another...
But her tombstone says 75, right? Dad left in 67, she died in 75. I don't know if...
Oh, hang on, we're talking about the film?
Yeah, we're talking in the film.
Yeah, right, so she died in 75. Right, so it's set in 95 then?
Well, that 20 year, I don't think that 20 years is meant to be quite literal.
Okay.
But we'll get to that when we get to the movie. So he goes to his old hometown. He says, I'll just take a walk around. I got another couple hours before the next train back back Kyoto, so he can get to Tokyo. So he wanders through the old streets. Everything's kind of changed.
Beautiful art.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And he decides he's going to visit his mother's grave.
Yes.
Now, at this point, we kind of learn that it's all done. There's a lot of narration, like voiceover. Captions, yeah. Narrative captions. And we learned that his mother died. She was 48 years old, mm-hmm. and that was 22 years ago that she died. Is what we're told. And it's the 23rd anniversary of her death is coming up.
Yes, because that's a significant
religious day. Yeah. And his father went missing when he was in grade 8. This is another detail we learned through the narration, just through his, by the way, this man's name is Hiroshi Nakahara. So he visits the grave and he thinks that his mother died. I mean, she was sick. We get a flashback to her deathbed scene at the hospital. And she, I don't know quite what her illness was. I don't know if we're told, but he feels like she kind of worked herself to death. Because after Dad left, she was on her own. She had to take care of the kids.
Yep.
Worked herself to the bone, basically, and was heartbroken as well. And he thinks, and then his question is, were you happy? And he asks this question in his mind at her grave. Mm-hmm. And then we get some first-person POV drawings of, there's some rustling in the trees. There's this butterfly that kind of flies up, and then he falls over, he faints.
Yes.
And he wakes up, and...
we see his POV still.
It's still his POV, right? And he feels light.
Yeah.
And weird.
Yes, and he looks at his hands and they look different.
Yeah. But it's still like, he's still like, whoa, what's going on? He goes back to town. Everything's a little bit different. He catches sight of himself in a shop window.
Yep.
And he's his young self.
And he screams.
Yes.
Just like the outsider.
Yeah. Yeah.
Except he's not a corpse, he's a 14-year-old boy.
That's right. So he goes back to his house, which is now as it was back in 63. So it's 1963. His cute little sister is there.
Yep.
His dad is there. It's the first person he sees when he gets home. His dad is outside loading stuff in the trunk of the car.
He's shocked to see his dad. Because his dad, of course,
took off when he was in grade 8. So he hasn't seen this guy in a very long time. He's like, whoa, that's Dad. His mom's there. Grandma lives with them. And it's like the winter break is ending and school's about to start. School year's about to start. Am I getting the Japanese school year right? I think they start in April. And he's just like bewildered. Mm-hmm. Initially, they were like, "You have a fever? Are you sick? Are you like, what's wrong with you?"
He's overwhelmed actually, and he starts to cry.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. To see all these people, you know, that he hadn't seen in a very long time, etc. And initially, he's like, "Okay, this is a dream."
Yeah, he's sure it's a dream.
Yeah,
he's overcome, but he's also certain that obviously this is not real. I'm dreaming.
Yeah. But then he kind of somehow forgot, I guess because of all the sensory overload of all this stuff, he kind of forgot that this was the summer that his dad disappeared.
Yes.
Right?
Or the year, because it's...
The year, that's right. This is the year that it happens, when he was in grade 8. He's about to start grade 8.
Yes.
So there's several months leading up to this, and he's kind of... By the way, about the overload, so a lot of this enjoyment, the enjoyment of A Distant Neighborhood is kind of, I guess for Japanese readers, it would be stronger because Taniguchi draws very detailed environments of what Japan would have looked like in 63.
Yes.
So that element might be kind of missing if you're not a Japanese reader.
For sure.
But again, I've been to Canada twice in the past 2 months, and you can't go home again. Like every time I go there, it's like, this is not where I grew up, and people are missing from my house that were there. And the shops are different, all the streets are different, and it's really that, it still connects on that level, I think.
For sure, yeah. I found it, the thought of, it's quite emotional.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah. But it's not a dream, and he's actually going to spend several months.
All the way through to the end of the summer holidays.
Yeah.
So most of a year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
And what's more, he loves it.
Yes. He's free from the responsibilities of an office job, being a salary man. He enjoys his classes because he kind of uses his math and English language skills in his work, dealing with clients and stuff. So he's actually good at math.
Yes, but it's not just that though, is it? He's also beats all the athletes. Mm-hmm. So he's now, because he's taking such joy in his youthful, strong body, he can now run faster than the track coaches. Also, he beats up a bully.
Yes.
Using his knowledge of a headlock.
That's right.
The Cobra grip. Or
the Cobra twist, I think it was.
The Cobra twist.
Maybe used by Inoki.
It was Inoki, it was mentioned. Oh, well, I mean, in the text it mentions it.
Yeah. So he's actually, which is not, that's like going to be invented in a couple of years. Like he's using future wrestling on these guys.
On the surface, what it is he's using his knowledge of the future.
Yes.
To thrive in the past. Yes. So this is the textbook definition of this.
Yeah.
Go back in time, you know who's going to win.
Yeah.
Like in Back to the Future 2.
Yeah.
You know who's going to win the sports. You know that you should invest in Steve Jobs.
Yeah, even in Back to the Future 1 where he's like, hey, I've seen this one, it's a repeat.
Yeah. Or except you're going to benefit from your knowledge.
Yeah.
In some way, shape or form.
Yeah.
And he even, and another thing, girls throwing themselves at him.
Well, one girl in
particular, the class princess.
Yes, the most beautiful girl in the school. Yes,
she's all over it.
Yeah, yes.
This is important, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All of these things.
Yeah. The as far as the athleticism goes, there's this particular scene where they're jumping over the vaulting horse. It's about 100 pages into it, and he jumps it easily, and he's like. ecstatic.
Yes.
He's like jumping around like woohoo, and the other guys are like, "What's with this guy?" It's the funniest. I've laughed. I mean, I laughed when I translated it, and every time I reread it since, I laughed at this particular moment because people don't know what this guy is on about or why he's so excited for having jumped over the vaulting horse. Yeah. They're all doing it. So he joins the track team. He makes his friend named... He's got two friends. One is a guy that rides around on motorbikes. And he knows...
something like that, yeah.
He knows that this guy died in a bike accident.
In less than a year. Or in slightly more than a year when he's 15 and they're 14 now. And his other friend, Shimada, is like a cool kid. He has a large library. Mm-hmm. He lives above a bar
that his mother runs.
Yes, and that he pals around with the hostesses.
The sexy waitress, and
stashes booze.
He stashes booze, and his dad, we learn later on, was a drunk that left the family and is now in hospital with a bad liver.
In one town over.
Yes.
Yes. And also is an aspiring novelist, although he's told no one that. But of course, Nakamura, he knows it because he has future knowledge. And he tells him that, you want to be a novelist, don't you? And he's like, how do you know that? I never told you.
Well, okay, so something we have to say here is, Taniguchi treats all this stuff like he's the first guy to ever write a time travel story. Because the whole thing about the novel is straight out of... Marty McFly's dad was... the novelist, and there's like a bit at the end where he opens a box of books. It's almost the same thing happens here, as if it's brand new.
Yeah. You think he watched Back to the Future?
And also, he's like, kind of doesn't really know anything about time travel, one thing that happens is when this romance with this girl starts, which I can't remember her name, I've written it down somewhere, but anyway, this is a romance that hadn't happened in the original timeline. So now he's like, okay, is the timeline changing?
One thing about this is that it's quite absent of time travel terminology.
Yes.
Now, you're the translator.
Yes.
So I go straight to the source. I assume that the Japanese, he's not talking about... You didn't use words like timeline, or... It seems... It actually doesn't feel much like time travel.
Yes.
It's more like this idea of going back and fixing your mistakes.
There are some moments where he says timeline, they're in there, or time traveler, but they're very rare. It's like the guy. It's like the guy's never read a time travel book or seen a time travel movie before. Is his reaction to all this?
Yeah, well, this is a particular subset of a kind of time travel story.
But he's also kind of... You can see this is a kind of boring businessman that probably never read those comics or movies. Or
he doesn't have the interpretive framework. Like you don't hear him saying things like, "Oh, this is like this is just like H.G. Wells' Time Machine."
Right.
Except I didn't get into a clockwork mechanism, or no portal open, so this isn't like the Terminator.
You're right.
Instead, he's completely that language is completely absent from the. In big contrast to a comic that this reminded me of, Sandcastles, which also dealt with time malarkey.
Yeah, right.
That one is very self-aware and talking constantly about what could be occurring.
Yes.
This one, it's much more prosaic. He's just gone back, and he doesn't know why.
Yeah.
And we never do find out.
Yeah.
In fact, it could have all been a dream.
Well... I think he went back because he asked his mother at her grave on the 23rd anniversary of her death, "Were you happy?" And the soul of his mother, or the forces of the universe, sent him back in time to find the answer to that question.
That's a potential explanation. Yeah, I mean, because, of course, there's an Aesop. He needs to learn to be happy in his own life, because we quickly figure out that he wasn't happy.
That's
right. I mean, he was pretty miserable in those opening pages.
Yes.
I mean, we know he was hungover.
Yeah.
But he was, pretty miserable.
Yeah.
And we get a lot of flashbacks and flash-arounds.
Yes, actually there's a moment where he flashes, he has a dream in his 14-year-old self. He has kind of a dream where he's like a spirit overlooking his family at home.
That's unusual.
And he hears them talking, hears the daughter talking about her boyfriend and how she wants to move in with him. Yeah. And she's 19. And we hear about whatever's going on in the younger daughter's life, and they're like, "When's Dad coming home? He'll be back in a couple of days." That kind of stuff. He's like, and he's trying to speak to them like a ghost. They can't hear him.
That's odd. So as well as time travel, we've got kind of like astral projection going on.
Yeah.
And there are two hints in the comic that this happened.
Yeah.
The first is this, that they've been keeping the fact that the daughter's moving out secret from him.
Yeah.
Because they know he'll flip out.
Yeah.
Because he's a curmudgeon, I guess. Because he doesn't identify it. He has no empathy.
Yeah.
He's a step removed from his family relationship and from his daughters. He can't relate to what they're going through until he gets back in time and is a teenager. When he returns to the present, spoilers because that's what happens, he mentions the boy's name.
That's right.
Which, in theory, he couldn't possibly have known.
That's right.
In theory.
Yeah.
Maybe he heard it sometime. Possible. I mean, if we're playing devil's advocate...
Right.
His unconscious might have thrown up that name when he was in, like, whatever, when his brain stroked off in the cemetery.
Yeah.
The other clue that it's real is that he receives a book from Shimada.
Yeah.
Is it Shimada?
Shimada.
Right when he returns.
Yeah.
It comes in the mail and it's signed to the time traveler.
Yes. Because he had gotten drunk on Shimada's pilfered whiskey and started revealing all sorts of stuff about the future, like about people being assassinated and all this stuff about the Olympics, etc.
Yeah. When he gets drunk, he has no filter, so he starts talking about his daughter and how he's married and his daughters. Yes.
So we have to assume that Shimada remembered this stuff and then wrote it in.
Yeah, exactly.
But
and knew exactly how old, 48. That when he would be 48 is when he went back.
Yes.
So he sent it to. So I don't really, unlike my half-baked explanation for him knowing the daughter's boyfriend's name, I don't really have a good explanation for.
No, it has to. It all happened. Of course, it all happened. That's what the book is telling us with this time travel bit. But it does raise all sorts of questions about. As often, there's a big hole in your time travel story. What was Hiroshi doing? What was young Hiroshi doing after the adult left his body? So that means he continues with his 14-year-old life with no memory, maybe, of all the things he said. And then meanwhile, Shimada's hanging out with him still. And then 2 years later, when this guy's assassinated, he's going to confront him and say, "Hey, remember you said that guy was going to be assassinated?" And
it's like, what are you talking about? He wouldn't remember that.
Yeah, like it's all like
further questions.
How does any of this work?
This is a problem with any time travel story.
Yes.
100%.
Yeah.
So that's one reason why I would like it to be. I think the story. I would like it better if it were more.
If it was a dream.
If it were I mean, I like it if you're not sure. I like the uncertainty.
I like it being a dream because that means that he had to come up for his own answer of was my mother happy or not?
Yes.
Because there's a conversation with her after Dad leaves that he never had in the original timeline. It only happens in the dream.
Yeah.
So it's his subconscious coming up with what he thinks about, what the answer to what was his mother happy or not.
I agree. And I also like the idea of it being a dream as well because I think it fits in better thematically. Yeah. Because his behavior in the past, or rather his experience of the past, is such a fantasy. Yeah. Because what do people want when they're... What do teenagers want? Yeah. It's been a while since I was a teenager, but you want to be the best at stuff. Yes. You want to be the best at school. You want to be able to run faster than the track, beat up the bullies, get the girl. All that happens. Yeah. And now I know that he uses English in his job, so his English is probably going to be good. But other stuff, like those complex fractions, the algebra...
That is true. Yeah.
I was reading that thinking, if you plonk me back in maths, there is no way... Yeah, I would know what was going on.
It's interesting because the movie corrects that.
It does, right? Which I really, really liked.
I liked it too. But I liked both. I thought they were both feasible.
I think it's fine because I like because this is the fantasy land. Yes. He's gone back in time, and I mean, we've pretty much summed up the plot, so I don't think we need to talk too much more about the plot. So I might as well jump straight to...
But if it was a fantasy, don't you think he would have been able to stop his father, or is the subconscious fantasy that his father still leaves?
Well, it's because he has to face reality. Yes. And the way he faces reality is because his father leaves. Yeah. And he realizes, I know, because the Taniguchi makes it explicit. He wakes up to the fact that he is his father. Yes. Yeah. His father running away to find, quote unquote, search for something in some distant neighborhood is what he's doing, gallivanting around in the past.
Having a romance with this 14-year-old girl that was not the woman he's married to, or that never happened in the first place. It's like he's sick of that marriage or those kids, sort of, or at least he believes he is. Yeah.
He's running away from his responsibilities and from his real life people that need him and love him.
Yeah.
He's run away.
Yeah.
And he can't stop his father from doing it.
Yeah.
Even though he confronts him, he knows where his father's going to be at the station when he's about to leave.
Yeah, because they had police reports about the last time he was seen or whatever. It's kind of dad goes out for cigarettes type of story.
That's exactly what it is.
He just left one day, and then suddenly he never came back. But we have police reports that he was spotted at the train station at this particular time, etc.
So he goes to meet him there and confronts him. And even when he's being confronted by his own son and he's begging him to go back, he still says, when you get to my age, you'll understand.
Yeah.
Or maybe you'll feel... I think he says, once you get to my age, I think you'll understand some of what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And he does understand it, and he realizes
and he lets him go. He lets him go to get on that train.
He lets him go, but then he wakes up back in reality.
Yeah.
And goes back to his family. And it's strongly implied that he's turned over a new leaf.
Yes.
Because the first thing he does is he asks about the girl's boyfriend.
Yeah.
Says he's fine with it.
Yeah.
You know, he's realized that happiness is where you find it.
Yeah.
And it's his father's midlife crisis of... Well, I mean, we learn a lot about the father in the comics.
Yes, now we haven't covered the backstory of this, too, which we get from the grandmother, and which he did not know in the original timeline. He never
knew it. No one ever told him.
Yeah, so what had happened was, back in the war, he learns that his mother actually had a previous husband for one day.
Yeah.
So she had married this guy. This guy, there was a romance between his mother and this other man.
Yeah.
And he got called up by the army. It's World War II.
Yes.
And he wanted to get married before he left. So they were married for one day before he flew out. And then when he flew out, he was killed in combat.
Yes.
But before that happened, he had saved Hiroshi's father's life.
Yes.
Dad's life. So now the dad has come back with the remains of this husband.
And he feels this guilt and responsibility.
That's right.
And he ends up staying and marrying...
Yeah, he's like, does the right thing, quote unquote.
That's it. And
marries her.
It's quite clear that he's been compelled to do it.
Yes.
And in fact, we even get panels where he's talking about wanting to go to Tokyo or something.
Right.
And...
He's telling her, I'm going to leave town.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm off.
And she says, no, please just stay a little longer, please.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And he does.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's nothing in Nakamura's life to compare with the kind of torment that Nakamura's father has undergone.
Yeah.
So it's possible that he's decided that his father's choice is the right one for him, but he needs to make a different choice to be with his family.
Right.
I mean, it's not... Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, this guy, he just had to go work in he had to learn haberdashery, he had to work in a tailor shop.
He became a tailor, which wasn't his life ambition. He just somehow took it over.
He has children, and he ends up reconnecting with a friend who's deathly ill.
Yes, he had a childhood friend, this woman who is now all alone. She has no one else to look after her while she's ill, and she, on
her deathbed, she says,
last ditch effort, says, "Or I'm gonna contact this old friend, even though he's married, and it's kind of inappropriate for me to contact him and ask him to come see me in the hospital. I have no one else to turn to."
Yeah.
So she calls him, and initially, I mean, this all comes out later. Hiroshi suspects that maybe his dad's having an affair, and he follows him. So he goes to this... he follows him on business, because he keeps making trips to Tottori, which is the next town over.
Yep.
And he suspects maybe he's got this woman in this other town. So he follows her, his father.
Yes. Dad
goes around, he does tailoring for a bunch of people, then he goes to this hospital and he meets this woman.
Yeah. It's not the most obvious place for romantic rendezvous.
No, but then the woman actually comes out and sees Hiroshi there, and she's like, "You must be his son."
Yeah.
Like she
says, "You're Hiroshi." She knows instantly who he is.
You must be Hiroshi.
So he's talking to his mistress about his kids. No, because of course she's not his mistress. Yeah. That's the reveal. I mean, the mystery is not super important. It's much more about nostalgia and the beautiful environments and the pathos of seeing the ones you've lost. But there is a kind of a little bit of a mystery. Why did the father leave?
Right. Well, when she dies, this is part of it, right?
Yes. Because she says to him, "I wasted my life." Basically.
That's right. And
I'm dying young, and I've just been waiting all my life to live, and my life never started, and now I'm dead.
Yeah, and that's kind of the trigger for him. But interesting things keep happening because, we get before he leaves, we get a flashback to him leaving, and a conversation between the mother and the grandmother saying, "We always suspected this day would come." This is before we learn about the war stuff.
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, so they know something's going on. And then when she dies, his relationship with that woman in the hospital is not a secret, right? Because he has a conversation with his wife about it.
Right.
It's like she knows about that he's been visiting her in the hospital.
Does she?
Yeah, she absolutely does.
Okay.
There's no, that's like, it's just grown up. That's a grown-up's
just
world.
grown-up stuff.
The grown-ups know about that stuff, and the kids didn't know about until now in this timeline when he's hearing it. And then when he finally, Dad does leave the train station, he comes home, he has a conversation with his mother. Hiroshi comes home. And he says, Dad left and he's not coming back. And she's like, I always knew this day would come.
Yep.
And she's just kind of been waiting for it to happen. So,
of course, she never gets remarried because you don't get remarried at this time in Japanese history.
No, well, she did remarry once. She remarried him because she did have the first husband, but...
Well, that was a special case.
That was a special case.
She was only married to him for a day.
Exactly. And even then, I think because she knew it was coming, she wasn't actually as heartbroken as he assumed she had been in the previous original timeline, right?
That's true. So she has her own guilt, I suppose, and her own regrets. Yeah. But there's a lot of flashbacks and flash sideways. This comic, I like this comic, but one thing I struggled with was the flashbacks.
Right.
There's nothing to distinguish it. The art style doesn't appreciably change when we're... So sometimes, because this is a comic that deals with time travel, it would be really great if there was some kind of clue in the art when we're in a certain time or place. And I found it really hard to know where we were a lot of the time. And I must say that the film eliminates the flashbacks almost entirely, and I found that to be very
yes,
change.
But there are moments in the movie, like there's a moment where he goes back to... He wakes up in bed and he's the old man again, and you're like, what's going on?
Yeah.
For a second before it's revealed that it's like a dream that the young version is having.
Yes. It's more like we never leave his perspective, really, do we? Are there any scenes that he's not in? Yeah, there are a couple. But he's always nearby.
Yeah.
So, whereas on the other hand, we get we get other people's perspectives.
Yeah.
We see the young... We see his father as a young person's perspective. We get a war comic.
Yeah.
We get like 5 pages of a war comic. And this is really kind of detailed and violent.
Yeah.
People are getting blown up and there's blood everywhere. I'm like, what the hell is this? This is like a nostalgia comic about a beautiful 1960s rural Japanese town, and now it's like Papua New Guinea or something, and they're all shooting one another.
Yeah.
Crazy. I found that a bit much at times. I still like the comic, but I could have done with fewer... A wavy panel border.
That's an interesting... There's very little flashiness ever in Taniguchi's work. Once he started out a bit more mainstream, but then he became this... A lot of his work is about nostalgia.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a kind of companion book to this called A Journal of My Father in English, where it's the mother that leaves.
Yeah.
And at the dad's funeral, there's kind of this all this untangling of why did she leave and all this kind of stuff. And it's very similar, but all his work is... A lot of his work is like this. So there's very little flashiness. It's a bit like if you've ever seen Ozu's Tokyo Story, where it's just people hanging out, living, and it's a bit like that. There's a few panels. There's one where he's speeding to the train station, and you just see like the kind of the lights of like the street lights or any other kind of lights just kind of flashing by. It's a bit 2001-ish. And there's a moment where he goes to the beach with the girl, his crush.
Yeah.
And
well, he didn't. He didn't really crush on her. She was just impossibly.
Yeah.
He was a nerd.
Yeah.
And she was the glamorous.
Right.
Queen of the club.
But,
he never even spoke to
He sees her in her swimming outfit.
Yeah.
And he's so embarrassed. He runs and jumps into the water, and you get a panel where you just see, like, you see the water, and you see, like, a corner of his head, like a bit of his head in the corner of the panel. That's very unusual for Taniguchi. So it's very rare that you get something like that. So the war sequence is really pretty radical, I think.
It's so strange that it's in there. It seems like a real departure from his usual style. I love the art otherwise in this book. The detailed street scenes, the environment. Yeah. Just like forests.
Yeah.
And
I don't think he had any assistants.
Oh, man.
I think he was an indie artist that just, as far as I know,
drew these amazingly detailed streetscapes.
Yeah.
And I respect that.
Yeah. So when he So once he has the answer about his mother, I guess, he goes back to the cemetery. I think he tried to go back once before, and there was no effect. But this time, does he stumble there or something? He ends up there by accident. I can't remember why.
It just happens again. He collapses.
But anyway, he faints and he wakes up. He's himself again. Yeah. When he's getting on the train, he bumps into his father.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, and it's this like old man. It's like kind of stoop-shouldered, gray hair, but he
sees him like through the doors of a train carriage.
And it's too late to get off the train to chase him down because the train's moving.
Yeah, good luck, because he lives in Tokyo or something. Yeah, good luck finding a random person in Tokyo.
Yeah.
He's got more people in Australia living in it.
But I think it was it when he got on in Tottori, though? I don't think it was in Tokyo. But anyway... then we mentioned Zenny, he goes back home, he knows things that he shouldn't know
Imagine if his dad was just living in Tottori, that would be amazing. Alright.
And as we said, then he opens up the book and it's to the time traveler, much like Marty McFly's dad. Opening his box of books, comps at the end of Back to the Future.
Yep.
And that's kind of it. So it's 400 pages, but it's a pretty fast read, really.
Absolutely.
Yep. Okay, so let's move on to this movie.
Yes.
Which I did not write down the year. It was
2010.
2010. Okay. So we had the French edition of the comic 2002. This is a Belgian director.
Yes.
Which again I didn't write down his name. I don't think he's done
Sam
much else.
Garbarski.
Garbarski, maybe.
Garbarski. He's of Jewish background.
Right. Okay.
I believe. Or no, it's a Polish name.
Okay.
He may be Jewish, but that name is Polish.
Okay. So we have a voiceover in this movie.
Very sparing, though.
Sparing, I think, really well done.
Amazingly
You
done.
need to have it in there. I felt like it's one of those things where you're like, you might read this comic and say, well, let's take out all the narration. But no, putting it in there is smart, I think.
But they don't use it too much. They use it very little. There's probably fewer than 20
in fact, there's some scenes where you want to know what he's thinking, and we don't get it.
No.
Right?
Sometimes a character will... So when he first arrives in his hometown, in the present, when he's an old man, there's a person who recognises him, Godin. And he provides some of the context, which in the comic is provided by the narrative captions. Things like, last time you were here was when your mother died.
Yeah.
Here's the old shop. Your mother, she tried so hard to keep it going, but, you guys had to sell, etc., etc. It's been a hi-fi shop, now it's all closed up. It's when he's in the town, like, I don't know how they did it. Well, I know how they did it. They worked hard. Because it's all bordered at, like, it's a rural French town in 2010 or maybe 1995. It's not quite clear. But it's, boarded up shops, empty streets, a lot of old, no one there, or a couple of old people.
Yeah.
And then he goes back in time to 1963.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a town in the French
I would say
Alps.
every shot in this... It starts with the opening shot of this lake, which is really beautiful, and we start with an extreme close-up of our main character's eye.
Yes. I didn't write down his name either.
His name was Verniaz, or... I did wrote it down like later, but it was... Verniaz, Verniaz.
Verniaz.
That's his last name, but it's they say it, you don't even hear the Z when they say like Verniaz or something like that.
Verniaz. That's very French.
Something like that.
So we see a close up of his eye,
and we get a little narration, which is like, I never could have imagined the strange events that were happening to me. There's a little bit of a line like that in the book, but the book doesn't really set you up for a time travel story. And if you're a normal reader of Taniguchi stuff, which is usually very prosaic, you'd be like, what? Like, he's traveled back in time? It's a bit weird that it happens here. We've got a bit of setup. But, so we get the beautiful shot of the lake, the beautiful shot of the eye. Now, we learned that this guy is a cartoonist. He's not a businessman in this version.
Yeah, a nice touch. Almost certainly a nod to...
Yeah, maybe a nod to Taniguchi.
Taniguchi himself.
But also, I think this guy's a Belgian director and is obsessed with Tintin, probably a little bit, because there's some Tintin references in here. There's some Mobius's Blueberries mentioned, which that will be covered on the show at some stage.
Brilliant.
But so he's going to a comic book fair to sell some comics.
Yes.
He leaves the house, nobody cares. Like, his wife takes a call as he's on the way out.
He's about to kiss her cheek, and she takes a call.
And the two girls are like, bye, Dad, without looking at him. They're in the fridge. And he's like, okay, whatever. He goes to this fair. He's got a table set up to sell his books.
And no one's buying.
No, nobody's buying. We learned, because one person does come to the table.
Yep.
And asks, are you going to do another book about this character, Agatha something? He's got this character named Agatha.
Something or other. Looks a lot like, kind of like Barbarella.
Yeah.
And, like, it looks like Forêt's kind of like art, the guy, the Barbarella guy. Right. A little bit, I think.
Yeah.
And, like, she's fighting lizards. I don't know, dinosaurs. Right. She's fighting dinosaurs. She's kind of like an adventurer. Lara Croft kind of character.
Right.
And this kid wants to know, where's your new stuff? He presumably already has. He's a big fan of Agatha. What's her name? And he says, I haven't really got any new stuff.
Yeah. He's got writer's block.
He does have writer's block.
And he wants to do something more personal instead of doing another Agatha book.
Yes.
Which is a bit like Hergé. Hergé hated Tintin, actually. He was sick of doing them.
Oh, sure. Sure, right. But also, this is thematically significant.
Right.
He's stuck.
Yes.
His family, he and his family don't have a close relationship.
Yeah.
He looks really mopey. Yeah. And we find out also writer's block. Well,
yes.
A perfect analogy for, I am stuck.
Yes. Yes.
Look, I can't produce, creatively, I am trapped.
So he gets on the train to go back to Paris, but he he's asleep, and then the ticket taker comes along and takes his ticket and says, you're on the wrong train.
Yeah.
And he's ended up accidentally on the wrong train.
Oh, but he says, can I get off at the next stop and go back to Paris? And the inspector says, I think you better.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a great line. He arrives at the station, and then we get, again, a very short voiceover explaining that he's back in his hometown, the town where he grew up.
Yes.
He speaks to the station attendant, says to him, when's the next train back to Paris? The guy says 5:40. It's sort of like 10 to 11 in the morning. And he looks at his watch. We later find out it's the same watch he had when he was a kid. He gets out his phone to call his wife. She doesn't answer, and he doesn't leave a message.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it, Mr. Garbarski.
Yeah. So he decides he's going to wander through the town. He sees his old friend Godin, who is fixing a motorbike.
He shakes his wrist. I love that.
Yes, he shakes his wrist.
He has oily hands.
Hands. And now we learn a bit about the past from this conversation with Godin. So in the comic, he doesn't meet anyone that he knows as he's wandering through town. So this is kind of a good way to get this material across.
For the narrative captions, I think it's a very clever choice.
So we learned that he hasn't been back from since his mother's funeral, which would have been in 1975, according to her gravestone.
Yes, very good.
We learned that his dad left the family on the dad's 40th birthday. Now, and then he says goodbye to Godin, and Godin says, okay, I'll see you in another 20 years. Now, I don't think when this line was said, my wife said, does that mean it's now 1995 when this is taking place? Another 20 years. But I don't think that can be right, because he's used a cell phone to call his wife.
Yeah.
And also, the shops have, the shop names have, a website under them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It doesn't seem like it's...
Yeah, it's not quite right for 95.
And this guy's a lot older than Nakahara in the comic, who's the same age as his mother was, 48, when she died.
Yeah, he's definitely in his 50s or even...
Maybe even older.
Maybe even, late 50s.
Yeah.
He does look pretty old.
Yeah. So I don't think that 20 years is supposed to be a literal number. Anyway.
Got it. That's the easiest explanation. Yeah. I mean, they've messed up with the dates, or, it's just been longer than 20 years.
Yeah. So, Godin takes him to his house, as we mentioned before, his old house, which was a hi-fi shop, as you mentioned, and now it's just boarded up. And he decides he's going to visit his mother's grave.
Yep.
And he does not ask her if she was happy in this version.
No.
So there's even less explanation for the time travel in this one. It just happens.
You've latched. I didn't even notice that when I read the comic. I guess that's as good an answer as any for why it happens. But I didn't even. I feel like he's much more interested in his father than he is his mother.
Yes.
In both versions.
Yes.
So
but even in the comic, it takes him a while to remember. Oh, this is the year that my father took off.
That's true. That's true too. Yeah. He has to discover it almost.
So he goes to the cemetery. We get the wind. We get the butterfly.
Yep.
Right out of the comic, get the first person POV.
A butterfly is significant because butterfly. I think of the butterfly effect. Although of course the butterfly effect is not in operation in this world because you don't change the future.
Yeah.
It's the opposite actually.
Yeah.
It's more like Fritz Leiber's Big Time. Have you ever read those?
No.
Where it's really hard to change to alter causality.
Right.
And also, butterflies undergo a metamorphosis, don't they?
Yeah. Yes, that's right. That's right. So it plays out very similar to the comic. Oh, I will say he wakes up and he sees his hands and it's automatically like, holy cow, what's going on?
Yep.
Whereas what happened was he had an earlier shot when he took out his phone to call his wife. We see the liver spots on his hands.
Yeah, we do.
So there's a significant difference, unlike in the comic where it's also partly Taniguchi's style, where it's hard to tell an old man's hands versus a young man's hands.
No. Yeah, exactly.
But he runs down the hill and there's a bike there.
And he just gets straight on it.
He just gets on it as if it's like the most automatic thing to get on this bike. He goes into town. He does see his face in the mirror in a shop window reflection, and he's like, whoa. But it's not as shocking as it is in the comic because he's already knows he's in his young body. Like, how can that be? How can he not know? Again, Taniguchi treats it like he's the only guy that's ever done a time travel story, and the guy wakes up and doesn't realize he's turned young until he sees his face.
It's just, they just have to do it differently, don't they? I think
absolutely.
I like it. They do make some stylistic choices. We don't see his face for quite a while.
That's right.
Even when we leave the first person perspective, the point of view perspective, we still see him in the distance.
Yeah.
Or just sort of like from the neck down.
Yeah.
He gets on the bike. We do see him in profile. We can see he's a young man, or like a kid.
Yeah.
Then, as you say, he gets on the bike and he goes into town and then he sees his reflection. And that's sort of when we get it.
Yeah.
But it is played differently. It's less of a shocking reveal.
Yes.
Also, I did find it odd that he just got on the bike.
Yeah, that was weird, but it's kind of...
There's no real explanation for it.
Well, we get a little bit of sort of an explanation later on, a little bit.
Do we?
Kind of.
Oh, you're right, we do.
Yeah.
That's never really expanded on what...
No, but this is a movie that knows what time travel is, right? Unlike the comic, which pretends that time travel is not a thing that anybody's heard of.
Yeah.
We do get some time travel stuff. But anyway,
right.
we'll get to that.
He sees his father, much like he does...
He sees his father loading the trunk of the car.
Well, before we get to the father, he's going through this town.
Yeah.
And as I said, the difference between this town and the one that we just saw in the present, it's like stepping into another world.
Yeah.
Also, they've really cranked up the kind of the lighting.
Yes.
They've really opened up the camera.
Yes.
To increase the kind of the contrast.
Yep.
So when he's in this, I liked because it's something missing from the comic. We know when we're in the past, because it's always drenched in light.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And maybe the light of nostalgia, you could say.
Yeah, for sure. And they've got all this. They've just gone to this film. It cost $18 million to make, so it wasn't a cheap movie to make. Even that's 18 million US.
Yeah.
I think something like 10 million euros or something like that. And you can see where they've spent it because they have bought every piece of mid-century furniture, Tupperware, cars, signage. Yeah. They've created all this period-appropriate signage. Yeah. Clothing. Everyone is dressed in the styles. There are no school uniforms, unlike the manga, where they're just wearing the school uniforms that haven't bloody changed in Japan since 1850s. No, not 1850s. Like the 1870s or whatever. Yeah. But here, the kids are wearing the styles of the time. I must say, since you told me that Georgina, your wife, watched it with you, I imagine she really enjoyed this because she's a big fan of the mid-century aesthetic.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have to say, not just that, there's a lot of focus on the objects.
Yeah.
There's like the camera lingers on these objects from the past. It's really a fascinating translation to film.
It's so good.
Because Taniguchi's an artist doesn't really do a close-up shot of an object to fetishize this thing as a nostalgia object.
But I mean the sort of like the decorations, the things in the house. Yeah. There's just not I don't know, maybe how consumptive was 1960s Japan? I don't know, it's still recovering from the...
Yeah.
I think it was probably becoming... I'm not sure. But I know that, 1960s France, they're recovering for... This is kind of like France enters this period known as like the Great Boom that lasted for decades, where everyone's quality of life improved drastically. So a person's house, even like a tailor's house in a home in the Pyrenees, he's going to have stuff.
Yes, and Verniers picks up these objects and looks at them in the camera.
That's the first thing he does when he goes home after he's seen his family and thrilled to see them. He starts, as you said, fondling.
Yes. Yes.
these beautiful objects from the 1960s.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Dad is there, Mom is there, cute little sister is there. Grandma doesn't live with them, but she is in the movie. He thinks it's a dream, but he's like seeing these people again. As I mentioned, there's a moment where he asks his sister to come up and kiss him.
Yeah.
Give me a kiss. Great moment. Dad is he's behaving weirdly. As he does in the comic, they say, "Are you sick? Do you have another headache?" This is a line she says to him.
Yeah.
Dad is kind of oblivious to his weird behavior, or just like brushes it off, like whatever. This kid is acting.
He's distant.
But yes, he's distant. Mom is a bit more observant. Well, quite a bit more. Like there's a moment where he's admiring his physique in the mirror. Like he turns to the side and there's no gut and stuff. And Mom is standing there in the doorway and sees him doing this.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of moments where. Like there's later on in the movie, he's helping her hang out the laundry. In fact, he helps with the dishes and stuff at dinner, and she's like, the camera shows her giving this guy a look, like what's up with this kid. He's hanging up the laundry, and then he puts on a sheet as if he's a ghost and comes up and hugs her, and she's like, why is this kid hugging me? But then she like
relaxes into
let it happen. This is
so
a moment. Yeah,
she's a great character.
Oh yeah,
the mother. Played by Alexandra Maria Lara.
Okay.
She's, I think, Swiss.
Okay.
She will appear in The King's Man.
Okay.
From 2021, which is based on a comic.
Right.
In The King's Man, she barely looks like she's aged today.
Right.
Later on, I want to talk about what's the Frenchest thing about this movie. I think perhaps for French adaptations...
There's a lot of Frenchy stuff in this movie, for sure.
I think when we do a French comic adaptation, we should have a running segment called "What is the Frenchest thing about this movie?"
Yeah.
I think one of the Frenchest things about this movie is she's so hot.
Yes. Yes.
She's just gorgeous.
Yeah.
And she's played so well because she, like her counterpart in the manga, she knows something's up.
That's right.
She's apprehensive.
Yeah.
But unlike her character in the manga, she's not resigned.
Right.
Instead, she's very much in love with...
Right.
I think we can see that she is a romantic.
Yeah.
She deeply loves the people around her, including the dad. And unlike the fatalistic scene that we get at the end of the manga where the mum just says, I knew he was going to go. I knew this was going to happen. Instead,
She says that, but then she says he'll come back one day. In the movie versus the...
Film mother... She says, he's going to come back. In tears.
Yeah.
She it's much more tragic.
Yes.
Because she loves him.
Yeah. So in the movie version, she could have died from heartbreak versus the comic version.
And she doesn't remarry. And there's less of a stigma in 1960s France to remarriage. Anyone would marry this woman.
Yeah.
And yet she never remarries because she's holding a torch for...
Yeah. By the way, the dad is really well cast. He actually has a kind of facial facial resemblance to the adult.
The other great performance of this film, the dad's fine, but the young
Vernier,
just really good.
Oh yeah,
a really great performance. He was nominated for an award, as I'm sure you imagine. He didn't win, but a great performance. Sometimes you just really almost believe that he's an old man.
Yeah.
There's a great scene where he's smoking in the bar and drinking whiskey.
Yeah.
I don't know how he did it, but he's like, I've got 2 kids.
Yeah, it is really good.
Cool.
So immediately something happens. So we know from the opening scenes where he met Godin in town that his father left on his father's 40th birthday.
Yeah.
But he has arrived at a week past that date and dad is still at home.
A mystery.
So he's like, this is an alternate timeline or something, he assumes. He actually uses the word alternate timeline, or at least translation of it, in a later scene.
This is a deliberate choice by the screenwriters to truncate the narrative.
Right.
So, he's sort of, unlike the manga where he's in the past for like 10 months or something, here I think it's a couple of weeks.
Yes, that's right. Maybe even 5 days or...
It's really short. Well, yeah, you're right. It's probably... Yeah, it could be as few as 5 days.
Yeah.
It could be as long as a couple of weeks. But it's very close to his birthday because they've just postponed celebrating it.
Yeah.
Because...
But that's a later reveal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
At this point, we just think the birthday happened, he didn't leave, that's it. We're in a different timeline, so maybe Dad won't leave this time.
Yeah.
He goes to school, as he does in the comic. There's an amazing moment here where he picks up, I think, the inkwell off his desk and pops it open and smells it. And, my God, that's the first thing I would do. And it's film, you cannot smell what's there, but you know why the guy popped the cap off this ink. You know why he's sniffing it, because he knows he's going to get a nostalgia hit from the smell.
Yeah.
I love that little detail. The movie's full of stuff like that. Yeah. Just completely full of it. Like, he notices that the teachers are younger than he remembers. All the students are younger than he remembered them, and the teachers are younger.
Yeah.
Because now he's actually older than those teachers are.
Much older.
Yeah.
They're in their 20s.
Yes. Yes.
Or 30s, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's like a 58-year-old man or something along those lines.
So we're introduced to Sylvie, who is the most beautiful girl in the school, but she's very standoffish. She doesn't talk to anybody. Mm-hmm. All the boys pine for her, but there's just no hope for any of them because she gives everybody the cold shoulder. He has a friend whose mom runs the bar, as in the comic. It's very close to the comic in a lot of ways.
And he goes up with him to much like they did in the comic, his friend, whose name's Rousseau, which great name. He has this huge head of frizzy hair.
Yeah.
First of all, he asks him if he wants a cigarette, I think, which he refuses.
Yeah.
Then he asks him if he wants to look at a comic, and did you see what the comic was?
Yes, it was Satanic. Right?
Satanic, with a K, which is a Diabolic kind of rip-off.
Yeah, yeah.
It's an Italian comic like Diabolic, although in Italy there's some funny, complicated stuff here. In Italy, it wasn't called Satanic, it was called Killer.
Right, okay.
And there was another Italian comic called Satanic that had been adapted into French as Demoniac. With a K.
Okay.
So when they just adapted Killer they called it Satanic.
Okay.
But yes, these are comics that owe their existence to Diabolic.
And then he pulls down a comic off the shelf, which is, I think, Mobius's Blueberry comic. And he's like, this is rare.
Yeah.
And this is a collector's item. The guy says, what is a collector's item? His friend is like, what do you mean by that? And he's like, oh, you can't find it. It's very rare. And he's like, you can have it.
And then
That's a bit of a Back to the Future kind of moment.
It is, yeah. What do you mean? It's brand new.
Yeah. Yes.
Then we get another candidate for Frenchest moment in the film. Rousseau asks if he wants to whack off with him.
That's right. And he's like, we did that together? And he's like, I forgot.
He takes off.
He forgot all about it. Yeah, I gotta go. Yes.
Kind of does the hand motion.
Yes. Okay, we get a bit more like time traveling stuff where Dad's watching a news report on TV about the Berlin Wall, and then he says, "Oh, the Berlin Wall will come down one day, and they'll all be reunited."
This is another thing that absolutely puts it in its time. The father says, "People forget how much we owe the Russians."
Right.
Again, in our world, Russians are obviously the boogeymen.
Yeah.
And have been for a long time in the Anglosphere because of the influence of American popular culture and the American historical narrative that they won the Second World War. A lot of Europeans are aware of the contributions of the Soviet Union to the conclusion of the Second World War and would even say that the Soviet Union contributed the most. Also, French people of this era would have not been particularly sympathetic towards Germans.
Right.
The way that the way that this guy, Viez, after the fall of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall, he's fine with Germans now, he's happy that families are reunited, but this guy, who we later find out was a resistance fighter against the Nazis, he's just like, let the Soviets have half of Germany. They fought for it, they can keep it.
Yeah. We learned this almost pretty soon after the sequence, because he's given a job to go see his grandmother, deliver something to grandmother, who I thought was not going to be in the movie, but she is in the movie. And he meets with her, and he gets the story. He flips through a photo album with her, which is, I love this too, because it's exactly what an adult does that a kid doesn't give a shit about. I go home and I'm like, Mom, let's look through this photo album. Who's this person? Who's this person? And she'll tell me all the stories about this, your great uncle or some, all that kind of stuff. So he's like, let's look through these photos. And there's a photo of his mom, Vinyas's mom and dad, and some other guy.
Yeah.
And it's like, who's that guy? Well, that was your mom's
fiance. Perhaps. They never got married in this one. They never got married
in this first one. But they were going to get married, but then dad and the fiance joined the French Resistance, and the fiance was captured and killed.
Yeah, well, he was shot by a patrol.
Shot, right.
And the father got away.
Yes.
And, quote, and did the right thing.
Did the right thing is the words
and
that
married
the translation
his best friend's fiance.
Yeah. That's right, they were best friends. So he did the right thing and married her.
And you're right, you're exactly right, because sitting and looking through a photo album, the young Vannie, he does all of these old man things.
Yeah.
He is so much more a fish out of water in this film than he is in the manga, where, Nakamura just slides back into his teen life.
We didn't mention it, but the math. So he's good at the math in the comic, and this specifically the opposite in the movie. Maybe because he's a cartoonist, but the math teacher's like, answer this algebra question. He's like, I don't know how to do it.
This is much more realistic. I mean, as far as we can use the word realistic to describe a time travel story. But if you, in your mind, of course you're going to go back and kick ass in high school because you know so much more now. But actually you would be completely divorced from the context. You would have no idea what yesterday's lesson was about because you've just arrived.
Yeah.
Not only would you, even in the subjects which you're good at, you'd still be struggling because you wouldn't have the correct context. You haven't been attending those classes. You don't know where you are. You would be behind and you would stay behind, and it would be a real struggle. Not only that, but he finds it really hard to... Everybody comments on it. Everybody comments, oh, you've changed.
Yes.
Of course you'd have changed.
Yeah.
You'd have changed enormously.
Yeah.
We like to imagine we're the same people we were. I feel like I haven't changed at all since I was 14. Still just a massively immature person.
Yeah.
But actually, I'm completely different.
Yeah.
And if you put me down, my friends would just think, who is this?
Yeah.
Who is this replicant that's replaced my friend?
Yeah.
And everyone comments on it. What's more, he finds it hard to relate to them.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to... He doesn't know how to spend time with them a lot of the time.
Yeah.
He's talking
He talks about how they're young idiots and stuff like that. When
he uses a lot of grown-up language. So like a teacher catches him doodling in maths because he still likes to draw. And she says, she's shaming him in front of the class teacher style. Oh, what's this? Oh, we've got an artist among us. Oh, this bears a striking resemblance to Miss Sylvie. And he says, I resent that implication, or something like that.
Yes. Was it insinuation?
That baseless insinuation, something along those lines. Yes. And she just flustered sends him to the principal's office.
Yeah, that's right.
He's not thriving.
Right, yes.
Which I think is a much more kind of grounded way of looking at it.
Yes.
Which is fine, because in the manga it's part of the theme. The theme that it's an escape into the past.
Yeah.
Here it's less of an escape and it's more... learning something.
Yes. So we actually get this montage of him kind of living his life. So you're right, it must be more than a week, because there's a great montage where he's like dancing in the bathroom with his buddy, or doing air guitar and stuff. Like, he actually starts to slip back into his youth. He does.
And we do get a line that says, my adult life seems further and further away.
Yes, and he talks, there's a line here where he talks about his daughters and says, is this the part where he says, my daughters don't love me, if they exist, if they actually exist? So we're actually getting the suggestion at this point in the movie that maybe he's starting to think that his future self is the dream and this is the reality, right? Like, that's another possibility of what's happening here. Just from this one line. Everything's very subtle in this movie. Like, nothing's layered on. It's just like a line here or there, a couple of words here and there that suggest...
But he's only really happy when he's spending time with his family.
Yes. That's right.
He'll say to his friends, I don't want to go do X, Y, Z, I just want to go home see my family.
Yes.
And they're like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
Weirdo.
Yeah.
And he's like dancing with his sister on the bed, dancing with his mother.
Yeah,
it's a
dances
lovely
with his mother. Great scene where he says, let's dance, you know. He tries to revisit the cemetery, as in the comic, to see if he can activate, you know, go back to his previous life, and it doesn't work. Dad gets a phone call from some strange woman. Mom answers the phone.
Yep.
And she's like, it's some woman. He answers it. And he's like, go away so I can talk to this woman.
Yeah.
And we get a scene where, okay, so now he suspects there's maybe the reason he leaves is because of some affair.
Yes.
Dad goes fishing every Sunday. He says, take me fishing with you. This is a scene that's not in the comic. This where he tries to pry some information out of his father.
Yeah.
But Dad's very taciturn. He says, like, are you happy? He just doesn't say anything.
No.
He says, do you like being a tailor? He says, well, you can make old things new again. That's kind of his answer. He's like, I inherited this job from my great uncle or something like that. A great uncle or something like that.
Yeah.
Gives very vague answers to things. Sometimes doesn't answer at all.
What is this? You're scaring the fish.
Yes.
Even though he's not fishing.
And then the kid says, didn't you ever speak to your father? And he says, no.
No.
And also his daughters probably don't speak to him.
No.
Yeah. So in this version, in the manga, Sylvie wants help tutoring with English. In this version, she wants to learn to draw.
Yeah.
And so what had happened was when he was doodling, he keeps drawing her, Sylvie.
Yeah.
You know, the
princess, the queen bee.
Has a distant crush on.
In this case, no, not a distant crush. He has a much more, unlike the comic, he has a much closer crush.
Yes, or I should
more
mean unrequited is what I meant
absolutely.
to say. Yeah. Because nobody can get near her. But he's been drawing her, and as you mentioned, the teacher picks up a notebook and says, "Oh, you've drawn all these. It looks like Sylvie."
Yeah.
So word has gotten around that he's been drawing her, and she's like, "Can I see that notebook?"
Yeah.
And he shows her, and that's what starts. She approaches him, says, "Can you help me learn to draw?" Because she wants to be a designer or something like that. She
wants to be a fashion designer in Paris or London.
Yeah.
He has this great line, which I should have written down. There are some great bits in this where he mixes up his tenses.
Yes. Oh, yeah. He does that in the comic, too.
Yeah, but he says, I don't know, it's so
but it's really like, he really cuts loose. Yeah, I know the line you mean, where he says everything out of order. Yeah. Because he says, I am a cartoonist.
Yep. And I will have a big hit.
I will have a big hit about a character based on you.
But I didn't know until 3 days ago.
Yes.
Oh, I don't know. He says, I didn't know that for a long time.
Yeah.
Until 3 days ago.
Until 3 days ago.
It's such a great line. Like, she just looks at him like he's mad.
Yeah.
She's like really confident. Like, she's only 15, but she's quite, really French, I guess. She's really confident.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And yet he can't, even more so than the manga, where Nakamura had similar reserve because he couldn't help but see the girl as someone younger than his daughters.
Yeah.
He just can't relax around her.
Yes.
He can't. She'll often try to kiss him.
Yes.
And he just can't do it. And she'll be like, you like me?
Yeah.
Like, is there something wrong with me?
Yeah.
It's like, no, there's nothing wrong with you. It's not that.
There's a good funny line where she says, he says, you're 15. And she says, am I too old?
Yeah, that's right.
Because he's 14.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good.
Yes, okay, so he's tutoring her. We get the dance sequence. He has a dream of his old self, his present self in this moment, which is that confusing moment I mentioned.
But they crank the lighting down so it's much darker.
Yeah. Yeah. We have there's a time travel moment, by which I mean his sister asks if people will ever really go to the moon. He talks about Tintin. He wears Tintin pajamas in several scenes in this movie, and he talks about that and how it really will happen, but she has to keep it a secret.
She says, a mother will wake us up to watch it.
Yes.
When it happens. And she said, but Dad will never let us watch TV at night. And he goes, oh, Dad won't be there.
Yeah.
She says, where will he be? And then he goes, oops.
Yeah.
And then he says, on the moon. Walking on the moon.
Yeah. Yeah.
So charming.
Yes. So we get a scene where Sylvie and Vignaz go to the beach. Plays it a bit like the comic, except it's more explicitly French that he's got an erection.
We just see it. Yeah. Thanks.
They kiss on the beach, and then he has to jump into the water. Which
Thanks,
he does
French movies, for showing me a 14-year-old's erection. He jumps in the water.
Yeah. He comes home, and Mom is confronts him about the fact that he lied about where he was, where he's actually out with this girl, and he's like, why don't you go for a walk? And she says it's not Sunday. She says, you can go for a walk anytime.
Yeah.
So he takes Mom for a walk, and this is when we learn that actually Dad's birthday had happened, but...
They just hadn't celebrated.
They hadn't celebrated because he had a bicycle accident...
At the cemetery. Yeah.
And they had to take him to the doctor, and he had a headache.
And he had to have bed rest for a week or something.
Yes.
Which is... And throughout the film, we've been hearing about his headaches.
Yeah.
Do you have another headache? They ask him when he's confused or, disoriented. Yeah. And you think, okay, fine, whatever. It's odd that the young person's having headaches. No, now it turns out that he hit his head.
Yes.
This doesn't really pay off. But it does explain maybe why...
I think it kind of does pay off in the final scene when we get to... Or when he travels back. Okay. In a way, I mean, there's a bit of time looping happening here because there's a... To jump way ahead, when he finally travels back to the present, he bikes to the cemetery and he falls off his bike, right? He falls. And when he gets up, he sees his old self walking into the cemetery in 1967. And he follows himself in there, and then he passes out again and wakes up as his old self. Oh. That's something that doesn't happen
yeah, you're right,
in the comic. But he has an accident which is like the same as the accident that happened to him 2 weeks ago, or I'm not sure what. But it's like he had an accident. There's some weird time travel-y stuff happening here.
It's mysterious.
Yeah. It's very mysterious. It's meant to be mysterious. Yeah, it's not meant to be explicit.
This isn't Primer.
No. Yes.
It's just meant to be...
yeah. But there's something going on here, like that accident was almost the same as the one that happened 2 weeks earlier or something.
He's linked by the two accidents.
It's funny because Sylvie's dad is the doctor that treated him.
Yeah.
And when he arrived at her house the first time, he's like, this place looks familiar. Like, he kind of stops in his tracks, but it's familiar because he had been there before he time traveled here, because he'd hit his head on the bike, and that doctor treated him.
It was familiar because he's got... Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
Okay, so now he's freaking out, because Dad's birthday party is going to happen. He's going to have to go out for bread. Not cigarettes, but bread, which is very not
cigarettes
Frenchy.
And milk.
Yeah. And he, much like in the comic, he starts following Dad on these business trips. And as in the comic, he does several business stops first, and then he goes to see this woman. And when he sees the first time he sees him meeting this woman at some place and hugging her, and he's like, oh, Dad's having an affair. This is when he gets depressed. He goes to the bar, his friend's mother's bar, and asks the waitress to give him whiskey and a cigarette. He has 2 whiskeys, and she lets this 14-year-old drink. Is that the Frenchiest moment in the movie?
This one does feel like the 14-year-olds are always smoking, which is another thing. Well, he almost hypnotizes her into it with his old man powers.
Yes.
Right? Because he's just so self-assured all of a sudden.
This does happen in the comic. Actually, in the comic, it's at the very end.
The barmaid offers him the whiskey, I think, in the manga. But here, he's just so... He just doesn't give any fucks.
Yeah.
He's not pretending, and he kind of... It's almost like he like Jedi mind tricks her into giving him that. She's unwilling to do it, but she does it because he's so intense.
Yeah. But she does cut him off after 2.
That's the... she does cut him off, yeah. She's not that overcome. He's still 14. But this is where he says things like, I'm 48.
Yes, that's right.
I've got a wife. I have to get home to my wife.
That's what he does that in the comic. There's a very similar... But I think that might be after everything's happened, and that's when maybe he's drunk and he goes to the cemetery at the end. I don't remember. Anyway. But there's
Incidentally, the waitress here is played by the director's daughter.
Ah, okay. Interesting. So he gets drunk at the bar. There is a scene in the comic where he gets drunk at Shimada's house, and Dad shows up, slaps him, and says, "Come on, let's go," and he follows his dad back home.
Oh, I'd forgotten about the slap in the comic. You're right, he slaps him here too.
He slaps him here, he follows him, so he's walking a few paces ahead of him as they go home, which is how it plays out in the comic.
Just so.
But it's shot really amazingly well in this movie because you just see Dad's back, and he's delivering his lines. You hardly ever see his lips moving because it's all from you're just watching his back. It's almost POV of Vinyas's looking at his father.
We are always getting Vinyas's perspective almost all the time.
Yeah.
Very seldomly are we not on, the camera's not on him, or we're not seeing what he's looking at. There's a really great shot. It's already, I think it's still coming. So it's after this scene with the drinking, but it's shot from a doorway and the mother is in bed and the father's in the bathroom. He's not on the toilet, but he's just sort of sitting on the side of the tub, I think. And she's lying down in bed and the bathroom is lit in blue and the bedroom is lit in sort of a soft yellow. It looks just like a comic panel.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm always happy to see this kind of shot.
Yeah.
It looks so good. Man, I took a photo of it. I'll have to post it on the Facebook page.
Yeah.
It's just...
Yeah. It's really great. So he follows Dad again on his next business trip. This time he goes to the hospital, like in the comic, and she comes out just like in the comic, and she recognizes him from his features. She's like, "You're him. You're the son." And he comes in and she reveals, that she knew him. They were childhood friends, and she called him when she got sick, and she's dying.
Yeah.
And
she says, I'll tell him not to come anymore.
Right.
And again, Vignette, the mature Vignette bubbles up to the surface again, and he says, no, he'll keep coming. He has to keep coming. And then he embraces her.
Yeah.
And she sort of hugs him and breaks down.
Yeah. Very shortly after, we get a scene where we learn that she has died, because Dad comes in to talk to Vignette in bed. He says, he's asleep, but he says, I know you're awake, and I know you met her. And
he says she died, and her last words were, I thought I lived, but I'd only survived. And my life never really began. And that's, again, it's the catalyst for what occurs next.
Yes. I will say in the comic, Hiroshi and Tomoko was her name. They have kind of even though it's only a couple of scenes, the relationship's a bit like she's very happy to have met him.
Yeah.
Like she expresses that to him, or maybe even Dad says to him after she's died, she said she was so glad to meet you, or something like that. And that's not really in here. No. So then the birthday happens, but he has tried to change the timeline by buying the bread before. They're like, oh, you didn't buy, we don't have bread.
He's gone out and bought bread. This is like Fritz Leiber's big... This is like Fritz Leiber's story, because people are always trying to change the timeline, and it just snaps back.
Yes. But he's already bought, young Vignaz has already bought the bread, so Dad doesn't need to go out to buy bread. So you got me. There's kind of look on Dad's face, like, you got me.
And then he takes off when they're lighting his birthday candles.
Right. He uses that moment. They come in, there's a great shot where they're coming... we just see Mom, sister, and Vignaz come in, and they've got the cake, and Vignaz is addressing Grandma, Mom's addressing Grandma, but we don't see Grandma, and she says, "Where's your son?"
Yeah.
And then
it doesn't change from this perspective of the three of them.
That's right. We never see the Grandma.
No. And we don't see an empty chair. We don't see, and then we get a tight close up on Vignaz, and he pushes something down. I can't even see what it is. Maybe a broom or something like that. And then he takes off.
Yeah. Yeah.
To find his dad at the station. He knows where he is. He knows he's catching the train to Paris.
Yes. So, because they know the time from the police report, everything like that. As in the comics, it's actually even visually very similar to the way they sit next to each other on a bench and they have this conversation at the station, and they hug as in the comic, and he lets him go. It plays out a little bit differently, because in the comic he's like, I was trying to escape from my wife and daughters, and we don't really get the sense that he's trying to escape from his wife and daughters, but he kind of empathizes with his father on a different level in the movie. I'm having trouble articulating exactly what that is, but he still does let him go, and his dad gets on the train.
Well, he tries to stop him again.
Yeah.
He says he has some really tough questions and strong lines. He slips into that past tense again.
Yes. As in the comic, he says... In the comic, she never gets over it. She had to work hard. All this past tense.
She couldn't keep the shop going. Yeah. She had to take on any number of odd jobs. It was really hard for us.
Yeah.
And the dad's like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
And then he says, you can't go. Why do you want to go? And he goes, I just feel like, all my life I've never made any decisions for myself. I've never had any choice. I just have to go and live or something. I have to go and see if I can find my life. And
before it's too late,
Vignaz says, we're your life.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
But then he can't stop him. I mean, I don't know what's happening here exactly. Maybe does he know that a 14-year-old doesn't have the power to stop an adult from doing anything, and he's just resigned himself to that lack of agency? Or is he willing to let his dad... Does he know he can't change the future?
No, I think there's something about him understanding his feelings. And also maybe realizing that his father losing his best friend and doing the right thing, quote unquote, is a lot different from his own situation. Like, there's circumstances here that are much larger than what's in his own life.
It's pretty much the same as the... I mean, it mapped quite well over from the Japanese context to the French one, actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, he does. He lets him go. Off he goes.
Yeah, and as we said, he comes back, has a conversation with the mother.
This one plays out very differently, though.
That's right. Because she says, I knew he would leave someday. He'll come back.
Yep,
And there's an amazing line from the son where he says, "Promise me you won't wait for him."
Yeah. But she doesn't say anything. She just brims over.
The scene often cuts before we get an answer to stuff in this movie.
And there's a lot of fade-outs as well.
Yes, a lot of fade-outs. Yeah.
Gives it a real dreamlike quality.
Yeah.
Yes, then we have that sequence you described.
Yeah.
He rides to the cemetery, sees the figure,
Yeah.
goes in, passes out, wakes up.
Yeah.
Then we get... Incidentally, the music in this movie, which we haven't mentioned yet,
Yes.
is such an important part of the...
Yes, we have to mention it. It's by Air.
Yeah.
And...
an electronic... They do electronic music.
Yeah.
They're a duo, a French electronic music duo. The director's a big fan. Apparently, according to the director, Taniguchi himself is a fan.
Okay.
Owns their records.
Right.
The director would play the music to the actors and the crew before a scene to get them in the correct
It's really interesting because
mood.
The music is not dramatic. It's Air. If you've heard Air, especially in... Like, my introduction was Lost in Translation, which I think was 2 years after this.
They scored both... they've scored Sophie a couple of movies, so they did Lost in Translation and The Virgin Suicides.
Okay.
And both of those films have very kind of ambient...
Right. But it's not dramatic. Like, even the scene where he's following his father to meet the woman that he thinks is his mistress, you think it would be like dun 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 dun, like kind of music. It's not. It's just the same air. If you've heard them, you know exactly what it's going to sound like.
Yep.
Somehow it works.
Oh, yeah.
Somehow it's still, even though it's non-dramatic, it's just right for the
perfect.
tone.
It gives it a real dreamlike...
Yes, absolutely.
Avant-garde kind of quality.
Absolutely. There's something ephemeral and effervescent about it. So he wakes up as his old man self, catches his train, falls asleep on the train again.
There's something that happened. He walks through the town again, and we're back to the...
That's right.
The rundown 2010, 2010s kind of like French town in an economic downturn. And here's something that happens that I think is really important. He walks past Sylvie's house, pauses in front of it, and doesn't go in. Yeah. I thought, is he going to go in? I thought, he's better not fucking go in there. Because that's going to really undermine what's... No. He just looks at it and walks past. Perfect. Yeah. Then he gets on his train back to... We get a bait and switch where the same conductor comes up, says, "Can I have your ticket?" Oh, he goes, "Oh, you've got the wrong ticket." Everything. Oh my god! Is he going to go on another whimsical adventure? No, he's just in the wrong carriage. Yeah. But we do get a moment here where he turns to look at the other passenger, and it's Jiro Taniguchi. Yes.
On the train. Kind of obviously the way the camera...
Lingers on him.
Turns and lingers. He gets off and he bumps into an old man on the platform. Yep. Or it doesn't bump, just walks past an old man and turns and looks.
That's all.
In the comic, it's quite dramatic when he sees this man that he's convinced is his father. And from the drawing, we get a clear look at the guy and it's like,
he looks like here, of course, because we're not going to find an old man that looks exactly like the actor. Here, this is almost like an Easter egg, I think.
Oh, yeah.
It's not a dramatic part of...
No, but you're like... There's no reason why he would stare at this man unless he was like, based on everything we've been through.
Well, I was thinking that could be him.
That could be him.
That could be him. He doesn't know for sure.
Was that him? It's kind of like that kind of
That's how old he would be.
But there's no line or... There's no... We don't get the... This is one of the moments where you don't get a VO. No. You just gotta be like, huh. And he doesn't like chase the man down or anything. Nope. Because they're not on... He's not on the train as he was in the comic. He just...
It's just a nice little moment.
Yeah.
Partly a nod to the comic.
Yeah.
And partly just, this is, him thinking.
Yeah.
I could walk all around and he could be right here next to me and I might not know.
Yeah. He gets back to his house and outside he's looking in the window. He can see through the window and it's his birthday.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, which is a parallel. We didn't have any of the birthday stuff in the comic. It was just some day that he left. I think it was the last day of summer vacation or something like that.
Yeah, that's
but
right.
Here there's a parallel with the birthdays as well, which we had no hint of.
Well, he'd gone on a trip or something and just not come home from the trip. And they're waiting for him to come back from the trip.
Right, that's right.
His little sister keeps going on about the souvenirs that she's going to get that she never gets.
Yep.
But yes, here it's much more around birthdays. Well, there was some stuff in the comic, kind of more Japanese stuff based around death anniversaries.
Yes, but what I mean is we didn't know that it was going to be Vinyaz's birthday.
Oh no!
The next day when he got home.
Amazing.
No,
she just said that I want to have a family dinner. She says in that first scene with him. We don't know why.
Yeah,
it's because it's his birthday.
Yeah,
and he's also visibly perked up. This actor's great. The guy that plays old Vinyaz, just the same as the guy that plays the kid that plays young Vinyaz. They're both really good. He's just looks happier. Like a great weight.
Yeah.
Has been lifted off him, and he smiles when he sees his family and goes in. Then,
but we don't. It cuts there. We don't see him interact with the family.
No, but we know that.
We know exactly.
Everything's. We know things are better, and as a kind of proof, he's working again.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how I feel about this. What he's drawing is what he's just experienced.
Yeah, exactly what's happened.
Exactly. It's shots of the film, including that first one you mentioned where we get the lake and then a close-up of his eye.
Yeah.
We see him drawing that.
Yeah.
Now, on the one hand, yes, he's working again. That's great because it means that equilibrium is restored and he's got past his writer's block. On the other hand, he's drawing exactly what he experienced. Then, did we just see the creative process?
Oh, yeah.
That I don't like.
Yeah. Yeah,
I kind of don't really like either of the ways that these works finished.
No, it's a bit of a this is a button on the movie that probably didn't
I don't think it needed to
be there. I don't think we needed to know that he got over the writer's block.
Or just show him drawing something else. Just show him working.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, yes.
Drawing something new.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just not drawing Sylvie again over and over.
Yeah.
But drawing something new.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't much like that. Much like I didn't really like the way the manga ended with the time traveler book and that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, well. It's minor quibbles.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed both of these very much.
Okay. Any trivia?
Just a little. As I mentioned, this film cost... it had a fairly respectable budget, something like $18 million US. As usual with the French box office, hard to find how much money it made. I couldn't really get anything. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'm able to find ticket sales or receipts or something like that, but this time, almost nothing. I got a sense that it didn't really go gangbusters. Mm-hmm. It was just okay, but it's kind of like, it's a bit art house, so...
Yes, absolutely.
And also, I think maybe that they had a bit of trouble marketing it, because how do you pigeonhole this movie?
Yes.
What is it?
Yes.
What genre is it? Yeah. It's hard. I imagine it was a challenge to advertise. Unsurprisingly, it won an award for Best Production Design.
Okay.
It's just full of all these amazing objects. They even have billboards.
Yep.
Period-appropriate billboards.
Yep.
There's when they're walking to school together, he's walking with his little sister and they pass by a billboard for like a racy...
Yeah, it's a movie house. What movie? I can't remember what movie it was, but yeah.
Because she says, that's not a film for kids!
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. As I said, Air did the music.
Yeah.
They are fans of Taniguchi, Air are.
Okay.
They apparently leapt at the chance to do it. I found an interview with sound bites from Taniguchi and Garbarski on something called Allociné website.
Okay. Which
is just a kind of it's sort of like IMDb for France.
Yeah.
It was originally a telephone service. You rang them up to find out movie times.
Movie phone. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Movie phone. Yeah.
Okay.
Except Allociné.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Now it's a website that does reviews and data like IMDb. And as I said, in that it mentioned that he would play the music to get everyone in the right headspace. Mm-hmm. Taniguchi liked the film. He's sort of involved in it in some way.
Okay.
As you say, he had a cameo.
Yeah.
And there are photos of him with the directors and so on floating around online on the French Wikipedia page. he enjoyed it. He thought it was a good adaptation. He said, the presence of the actors is the thing that is hard to match in a manga. He said it gave the film a real rhythm. It is a certain realism that allows the viewer to slip easily into the skin of the characters of a film. And then there's the music, which is an extraordinary way to express the feelings of a character in a more intense and complex way.
Yeah, it's almost a substitute for the narrative captions.
100%.
Right? Yeah.
I would say a superior substitute. I think this is a very effective kind of transformation.
Yeah.
And improvement. And he as well thought that he's a beautiful artist, but he said that the sets and the costumes sold the aesthetic even more effectively than the manga.
Right.
So high praise from the author of the book. That's pretty much everything.
Okay. Does that mean it's vote time?
Indeed.
Okay. All right.
Unless you want to do we've already pretty much covered. What was the Frenchest thing?
Yeah, I think the Frenchest thing was a 14-year-old drinking whiskey and smoking.
14-year-olds smoking the whole time, the whole way through the movie. Yeah.
I do love this manga. I loved working on it.
That's so cool.
Rereading the translation, though, I always have reservations.
It's hard.
It's interesting because I did record an episode of Deconstructing Comics about this, and at the time, I did like my own translation of it. This time reading it, I was like, I did try to make it deliberately kind of stiff and 60s-ish formal. Now I'm kind of wishing I'd been a bit looser with it. I'm not sure. I tried to kind of maintain some of the Japanese syntax and stuff, and now I'm like, was that the right approach?
I noticed that, actually.
And also please forgive Steven because he's one guy, so there's a lot of typos and stuff in there, and some stuff that could have been cleaned up, but he's just one dude trying to put out these art house comics.
Well, I'm very grateful to him.
Yeah, I...
That's fascinating to hear a little bit again of the process behind how the sausage is made. I do enjoy whenever you talk about translation.
This is a great one. I do really like this comic.
I think I agree. For me, it's also a yay. It's beautiful. Yeah. And emotional. There are certainly things that there's some things I don't like about it. As I said, the flashbacks. There's some plot point. There's some things that don't go anywhere. But I think you really feel things. There's a lot of pathos. Yeah. It's very emotional. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that it works thematically. I mean, as I said, I was thinking, you can't go back in time and do high school algebra. But then, of course, it's part of it. Yeah. He's dominating high school because that's what we all imagined we'd do if we went back in time. That's right. Yep. Yep. Because he's in the distant neighborhood. The past is the distant neighborhood where he's gone to find himself, but he was at home all the time. Right. You go on the journey to find yourself at the end. It's the hero's journey. It's just really good. Yeah. Yes, so it's a yay for me too.
Okay, the movie. This is my second time watching it. I watched it once just out of interest because
you translated it. Yeah.
I was like, let me try to find this movie. At the time, the subs were pretty bad. But I did like it then. I liked it way more this time. Somehow the attention to detail and the subtlety, and it's just really a well put together picture, I think.
Yeah, I think this movie's fantastic. Yeah. I just loved it. Yeah. Loved it.
Yeah, great. I'm
so worried happy. I wouldn't like it.
No, I wasn't so sure. I mean, there's...
Yeah, I didn't like My Little Sister.
You know what? It's interesting because there's a clear through line in the movie where when he arrives in town as an old man, his friend Godin says, hey, your dad left on his birthday. Remember that? Yeah. And you're like, pow, here's the inciting incident in the first, 5 minutes, and you got a very clear through line. So I was like, okay, he'll be all right with this because it's not like just people hanging around in town wondering what to do next. It's
I think that's what makes it different from My Little Sister, there are some similarities with My Little Sister with a mountain town and going back to the youth, and I think some sort of shenanigans with the older generation was going on in that too. Yes. Yeah. But it couldn't be more different because we have an exciting premise, which adds this extra dimensions to everything that he experiences because it's not just nostalgia, it's supercharged nostalgia because he's literally in the past. Yeah. Plus the mystery. I mean, the mystery's not super important, but it does keep it moving along.
Right.
So we've got a story that we can follow.
Right.
I just love this movie.
Great. Adaptation.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I agree for all the reasons we've already talked about.
We've pretty much covered it.
Yeah.
It did some things differently, but the things it did differently were almost always improved it for the screen.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I agree on all counts. And even the fishing scene, which is added, I thought was really good addition. All the changes, like the focus on objects, which is something which Taniguchi, as I mentioned, would not be able to do, or wouldn't bother to do.
No, he's a backgrounds guy. Yeah. He's good at the environment, not so much at the minutiae. Yeah,
and all the substitutions made sense for bringing it to the screen. And it's interesting because the tempo is kind of similar, I felt, in both. There's a kind of, is languid the word? It like moves at a kind of slow...
But there's
no rush.
But they've made changes they've made enough changes that it doesn't drag.
Yes.
It's not long. Yeah. It's only about an hour and 30 minutes.
You know, it's interesting because there's a lot of stuff about him joining the track team in the comic. In the movie, we get one scene where he's playing soccer with his friends, like a casual game. It's not the school team.
Yeah.
And that's kind of enough because you can see how much energy he's got out there.
Yep.
And how much enjoyment he's getting out of it. So all that kind of stuff really worked. Yeah, I thought this was great as an adaptation. This is the only way to do it.
Yeah,
I thought. It's considering they've switched countries completely, it's really pretty fascinating how they were able to pull it off.
Well, I've got a quote here from Garbarski.
Okay.
He says, of it, for a Belgian born in Germany of Polish origin, making a Japanese film, this is dangerous.
Yeah.
I appropriated the history and soul of this story. I tried to stay myself compared to how I felt when I read the comic book. He says, in the end, it's not so much the historical context as what he puts the aesthetic dimension of the comic that's important. He says, look, the formal aspect is crucial in this work. The staging, the framing is perfect. The setting brings a real depth. But the real difficulty was not to transpose history to France, but how best to restore this aesthetic dimension in the film. And I think he did it.
All right.
I think that's what... Yeah.
Agreed. Agreed. There you go. Okay, so please subscribe, rate,
and
review. Please leave a comment on whatever your platform is. Please send us an email at the email address in the show notes. Please join our Facebook, our Instagram. Please join our Patreon at patreon.com/comicbookmovieoblivion, all one word, because we need those bucks for hosting these long episodes. And
we need a new microphone. If you'd like my voice to be in the crisp quality that it was last week, please join our Patreon so that we can get a proper, instead of using this business card sized recorder that we use every week.
Yes. Did that cover all of it?
I believe so.
Okay. Next week we're going to do the new Joker movie, by which I do not mean the Lady Gaga movie. I mean the People's Joker, which was suppressed by DC Comics for 2 years and finally came out, got an official release a few months ago. And I won't say much more about it. It's a bit of a bootleg of a movie. Like a lot of those Batman movies from the Philippines, there were 7 of them that came out. So it's something like that. We will, I don't know quite, I've read the description of this thing. I don't know quite what Joker comic to read for it. So we're just going to read Batman issue 1, which is the first appearance of the Joker, and it's 11 pages long. And that's it. And I don't know, maybe I'll add something more to it. Maybe we'll do Mad Love as well, because it's a pretty popular one. But as far as I can tell, this movie's all over the map in terms of what Jokers it uses. It uses all the movie versions, all the comic versions.
Wow. Well then, I look forward to watching it.
Yes.